Pu'Erh tea. All right, the end of the line. Today we will discuss the world of Pu'Erh tea and Hei cha, a category to which some Pu'Erh tea belongs. I guess it would be good to mention Pu'Erh tea isn't so much a style of tea as an area where tea is made. And in that sense, Darjeeling of northern India has some similarities. By the classic definition of what makes a black tea, Darjeeling would very often not be that, but instead fall into the category of oolong. Though the world calls it black tea, it's distinct enough that we can just call it Darjeeling instead. Pu'Erh tea is essentially a form of crudely processed green tea, and at some points even similar to white tea. It's made around the area of Pu'Erh City in the Yunnan province of China, and rather than call it Yunnan green tea, it's distinct enough to call it Pu'Erh instead. There are differences, of course, and those are mostly related to how much the sun is involved. When you're making a Pu'Erh tea, like all the other types of tea, it starts with picking the leaves. The trees are quite special in this part of China. They are the wild Assamica bushes that the whole tea heartland is covered with. They are not the domesticated bushes like the rest of China uses. Tea trees in Yunnan can be well over 1,000 years old and become tall enough that you need to get up on a ladder to pick the leaves. In some areas, on specific mountains, there are towns famous for these ancient bushes, such as Laobanjiang village on Bulang Mountain. The leaves are picked, withered, pan-fried to kill the enzymes responsible for oxidation, this kill-green step. Although this step is not carried out quite as diligently as the specialists would do it in the famed green tea production regions of the world. The enzymes are, say, half killed, and this allows some of the enzymes to live on the dry, finished tea. This is the same as white tea, and it's for this reason that white and Pu'Erh teas can be aged and that they change over time. The difference between Pu'Erh and white tea is that Pu'Erh goes through a crude kill-green, while white tea does not, and Pu'Erh will get rolled afterwards, which white tea does not. Let's do a brief refresher. White tea gets picked, withered, and dried out rather quickly. Green tea gets picked, withered, goes through the kill-green step, goes through a rolling step, and then a rather fast drying. Pu'Erh tea gets picked, and weather permitting, goes through a solar withering, goes through a crude kill-green, gets rolled, and at the end it gets sun-dried. This is important because the damage that UV light inflicts on the withering leaves and on the drying leaves causes special chemical interactions to occur and unique chemical marriages to form. The slow speed of the sun drying causes the enzymes left alive after the crude kill-green step to mount their last offensive before the moisture content of the leaf becomes too dry to remain active. It's really important to note that they're still there. So I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I'm landlocked here, and the air is terribly dry. You can bring over Pu'Erh tea from Yunnan, but unless it's stored in a humidor or a temperature and humidity controlled kind of area, it will remain as it was when it was shipped. It will not change. The living enzymes on the dry tea have the potential to slowly react over time using the ambient moisture in the air to transform the tea from green through oolong, eventually into black if you leave it long enough. If you don't have the moisture in the air, the tea won't change. And even if you do, the process is tediously slow, generally taking over 10 years to get a basic effect, 20 years to get it to a rather good state, and 30 years for a connoisseur to be really impressed with it. With that considerable amount of time, they will appreciate in value to a considerable amount of money as well, with some 30-year matured cakes selling for over $15,000, and sometimes well beyond that, especially when they're coming from certain producers of certain leaf recipes and areas. This is where we can discuss the two worlds within Pu'Erh, Sheng Pu'Erh and Shou Pu'Erh, or raw Pu'Erh and ripe Pu'Erh. So Sheng Pu'Erh is just as I've described so far. It's a hardcore collector's tea, and one which investors can put a lot of money into with the hopes of reselling after benchmark amounts of time. So it's kind of like investing into the world of high-end whiskeys. Most of us in the world, we don't have that kind of expendable income to get into the really famous Pu'Erhs. And that sucks. There is a world, though, which, while it isn't that similar, it's an opportunity for us to enjoy at least a little glimpse of the earthy depth that aged Sheng Pu'Erh can take on. And that comes in the world of Shou Pu'Erh and Heicha, or dark teas. So those enzymes which transform the leaves, they do have favorable conditions for work. They like hot and wet environments. So what one could do is create these favorable conditions for them to give them the tools that they need to succeed. The drying tea can be piled up in a cave, sealed off and left to ferment onto itself, with natural cave molds growing all over it, as is the case of the Hunan Fu tea, a very ancient kind of heicha or dark tea, and kind of a blue cheese of the tea world. In the case of ripe Pu'Erh, which is also known as a heicha, there is after the final solar drying, the loose tea can be wettened, piled up, and covered. This will, just as the Fu tea, start a process with similarities to composting. One could also use special fermentation rooms like saunas so that an ideal temperature can be more precisely controlled. This wet piling process allows the producer to get considerably aged, mature flavors in a very short amount of time. As I said, it's not really the same, but it's the best most of us will get right now until we develop another way, or we just put in the time ourselves to buy young Sheng Pu'Erh and age it ourselves. It was said to me pretty early on in my tea career that if I wanted to get into Chinese tea, I should pick something like a major. Pu'Erh tea or everything else. The world of Pu'Erh tea is so vast, not only because of the Sheng and Shou types, but because essentially it's all wild tea, that different mountains and different towns on a mountain can be drastically different tasting, and because age and storage is another crucial factor which affects the end result. And those things, those parameters, they're not usually talked about very much in other types of tea, with maybe the exception of Taiwanese oolongs. In any case, I chose the path of everything else. So while I have not been exposed to so many wonderful old vintages of Sheng Pu'Erh, I have had a couple of wonderful experiences of teas from the late 70s and 80s. It's pretty cool stuff. I recommend it if the opportunity arises. This was the end of this is the end of the T Rainbow playlist. It was a lot of fun and a lot of work to put it together. I don't know what kind of crazy ideas will come out next, but your moral support, it really means a lot to me. I'm not at the point where anything that I do gets hundreds of views. So even one or two likes or comments, they really stand out to me and give me motivation to keep moving forward. Thank you for listening, everyone, and all the best.